Welcome to the Create Your Story podcast, with conversations on creativity, self-leadership and personality to inspire and support your wholehearted life. I'm Terry Conlon, author, creative transition coach, teacher and personality type practitioner. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to pay my respects to the Dharawal people, the traditional custodians of the land where I'm recording this podcast, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of lands across Australia and to elders, past, present and emerging. You can find the episode show notes, your free copy of Chapter 1 of my book, Wholehearted, Self-Leadership for Women in Transition, and lots more information at quietwriting.com. Now settle back and enjoy today's show. Welcome to episode 6 of the Create Your Story podcast. And it's the 20th of December as I record this, and we're steadily marching towards Christmas. I hope things are not too frantic for you and that you're able to find some quiet spaces in your days, time to read, time to write and reflect on the year that's nearly complete and the year to come. I'm thrilled to have my friend Beth Cregan join us for the podcast today. To introduce Beth, 12 years ago, Beth combined her passion for creativity with her great love of writing to launch her business Write Away With Me. Since then, she's presented hundreds of writing workshops to inspire and encourage young writers to find their voice, develop their writing skills, and connect with their inner storyteller. Her work has branched out to include presenting writing workshops for adults of all ages and stages and taking on the role of writing mentor. She believes writing simply makes life better, so in 2017 she set out on a journey to write a book to inspire teachers to develop a daily authentic writing practice in their classrooms. Soon to be published in 2022 by Hawker Brownlow Education, writing this book was a transformational experience both personally and professionally. Beth and I have a special relationship as early morning co-writers. We've never met in person, but for many months now, as we've both written our books, we've got up to greet each other at 5:30 or 6 a.m, connecting via Zoom and writing virtually in 25-minute bursts. In between, we have the most fantastic chats on writing, editing, publishing and life. And today we'll be chatting all these things, co-writing particularly, the writing journey, editing, working collaboratively as part of our wholehearted journeys. And I'm so excited we can share some of the joy and insights from our early morning private chats more publicly with you today. Beth and I are also collaborating and co-hosting a community writing program, the Writing Road Trip, that kicks off in late January 2022 with a free 6-day challenge on your writing identity, followed by a 6-week course to shape your writing roadmap, and then a 6-month community writing program. So if you'd like to join us or you're interested to find out more, head to the Writing Road Trip waitlist link in the show notes on quietwriting.com, or you can find the link in my bio on Instagram where I'm at Writing Quietly. And of course, all the links to connect with us both are in the show notes on quietwriting.com. Just head to podcast at the top of the website and you'll find the latest episodes there. Before we head into the podcast, warmest wishes to you for this festive season and holiday time. I hope you get to spend time with loved ones and to curl up with a really good book or two. Thank you for listening and connecting with me, Quiet Writing, and the Create Your Story podcast, especially in its early stages. It means so much to me. I hope it's been inspiring for you. So now, let's head into the interview. Hello, Beth, and welcome to the Create Your Story podcast. And thank you so much for your support of me and my book, Wholehearted, especially as morning writing buddies.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here in daylight hours.
Yes, so we usually catch up first thing in the morning at about 5:30 or 6 in the dark. So it's good to connect. And we'll talk about that more as we go through. We've had lots of conversations about writing, editing, publishing, and so much more on our journey together. So it's great for us to be able to share some of those conversations with people today. So can you, just as a starting point, fill everyone in on how you got to be where you are, what you do, and your new book?
Okay, well, I trained as a kindergarten and primary teacher, so that was like 35 years ago. And after I'd been teaching for a few years, I had a gap year in Asia and I wrote every day. So I'd always loved writing, but it wasn't so much of a daily practice. And then while I was away, I had that experience of making writing really part of my life. So I came back and taught, but when I had Molly, my first daughter, I decided that perhaps I'd like to reinvent myself a little. I wasn't sure that I wouldn't teach, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I started to study professional writing and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved being a student. I loved talking about writing. But I think perhaps the biggest part of that was that I worked out you could teach someone to write. Before then, I had the experience of capturing my own thoughts, but I hadn't really discovered that I could capture images and thread them together and make stories. And when I realised that somebody could teach me to do that, I had that understanding that I could teach somebody also to do that. So rather than go back into the system, I taught for a company that ran programs for gifted kids, and I taught writing. So I did that and various other jobs along the way. Then finally, in I think 2010, I'd had the experience of setting up a kinder, and I'd worked there for 3 years and I'd loved it, but it was where everything came together because I had the experience of running a business, because a kinder is a little like a business. So suddenly the writing and the running a business and the teaching all felt like they combined, and I decided to start my own business. So that was right away with me. And then I started to teach classes after school. So I had a core group of kids, some of who'd been in my kindergarten groups came through into my writing classes after school, so that was lovely. And then I started to also go into schools and teach writing workshops. And from there, I also started to teach professional development workshops for teachers. So those three, my private teaching, in-school teaching and working with teachers, became the core of my business and my writing. And so I blogged about that and wrote newsletters. And from there, that was the start of the book, really. At first, I felt that creativity was being sidelined, and it was very structured and very much based on assessment and data. And I wanted kids to have a chance to be creative and to fall in love with writing. And I had those kids after school who were kids that loved writing, and I just wanted to bring that spirit into school. So that was my start. And the book has changed and it's something a little bit different to that now. But my original intention, and it's still the intention, is to reimagine how creativity could fit into the actual structure of our program as it stands now. So I think that answers all of those things.
Fantastic. Yes, it's a big question. But in there, I'm just seeing writing as this thread that goes all the way through your teaching, your professional development with others, your own professional writing, learning, realising you can teach writing, and then sharing your knowledge from all that in a book. So I love a beautiful body of work focused around writing and around sharing the love too in there.
And I think writing has been my solid companion as a kid, as a teenager. Recently I spoke to the Year 12s at my school, and they have a journal as part of their Year 12 program. And I went back under the stairs and through all my boxes and found the journals that I had in Year 12. And I realised that it's just been there all the time. Not always at the forefront, but always there.
It's something that I connect with too. So
Yeah.
it's that idea of a body of work or ingredients or passions that are popping up, but they take different forms that I think, often is something we connect. So we both have a passion for writing. We both have a love for writing. And one of the ways we connect around that is writing in the morning together. So Beth was already doing dawn writing and invited me to join. So at 5:30, 6 o'clock, depending on the time of year, we hop up together. I live in Sydney, Beth lives in Melbourne, and we work via Zoom virtually to write. It's a great joy, isn't it, Beth?
It is a great joy, and it started so organically. It was the beginning stages of lockdown, 2020, and I was talking to Sandra, who joins us as well. It was just let's jump on and sort of connect with each other. And then that night, I just thought, I'm going to do this Dawn Writers idea and invite other people to come and write with me, because I felt like I really needed a structure. I was needing to move on with my book and lockdown and a house full of people all working at different places and the distractions. So it had this lovely start to it, not much thought, just sort of an idea in the shower. And I had no expectations for how that would look, I think. And how it looks now is exactly the way it was meant to be. Just a very small group of people greeting each other at dawn and giving each other courage to work on our own projects.
It's fantastic, and it's been such a support for me in getting my book written and published. And I know we're going through a similar journey, and we're able to share experiences, and particularly going through those hard, sloggy times where it feels like it's endless, cheer each other on a bit.
Absolutely. I don't want to say I don't think my book would be finished now if it wasn't for that, because who knows how I would have wrangled it into shape. But I don't think it would have been as joyful as it's been. And I don't mean necessarily the writing experience as being joyful, because I think we've had lots of conversations about that. It's not always joyful, but I think the conversations about writing that we have are joyful.
Oh, they are. Yeah. And I think the way we do it too, which for people listening is like a 25-minute Pomodoro type, set a timer. And so we're co-writing, but we're doing our own writing. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, we stop and have a chat. And often it might be what's surfaced in the morning pages or what might be the focus of our work. So all those conversations are really helpful too. I think they take away the isolation.
They take away the isolation, and they become part of your writing identity. I think over the last probably 18 months, at least, we've been doing it consistently now, haven't we? I feel like some of my real aha moments and real formative moments about writing have come from those conversations, because there is something about the dawn sort of breaking open, and you're breaking open your own day, and there is a sort of a vulnerability about that energy. And I feel like some of the biggest things I've learned about myself and recorded are really important, foundational to how I think of myself, came from those conversations.
I find that too. I've always got a notepad here, and I'm often writing down things that might be something you say or a book you recommend or a podcast. And I think it's to the rhythm of checking in regularly. Yes. you develop ongoing dialogue, perhaps.
Yep. So. My book is for primary teachers, ultimately, although for any teachers at work and teach writing. But one of the chapters is about writing routines and rituals, and we don't think always in terms of that in a primary school setting, but it has been really instrumental. It's a rhythm and a routine for me to wake up and do a series of actions and to come in to the space where it's usually quite dark. I only have a lamp. I do things very much the same each morning, and it means that when I sit down to do that, my brain signals this is time to If it's journaling, then this is time to reflect. Or if it's writing, this is time to think things through. This is time to brainstorm ideas. So that routine and that rhythm of same time, same place, it's always you and I, but other people come in and out of that as well.
Mm.
It's amplified for me how important routine and ritual is to actually any sort of project that you're working on.
Absolutely. And I think it's that idea of where writing practice or practice anything and routine come together. Like routine can sound a bit, dull and boring, but that idea of practice and craft, and showing up to the page.
It does feel like, in its own way, it feels like it's sacred. And I think we've talked about this recently, that it feels somehow it's not a religious or spiritual experience, but it is the regularity of a form of worship with words, really, and turning up to do that, making space to do that every day, or 5 days, and the days that we give ourselves off to sleep in.
And I know we often get to the end of that, it might be an hour and a half, might be an hour, whatever we choose to do, and say, well, that's great. We've done the important thing for the day. And I think it gives you a bit of a head start.
It does. It does. On the days when I don't do it, it feels like a slippery time in terms of settling down and getting work done. I'll find myself sort of 9:30, and then suddenly I'll do something else and it'll be 10. Whereas when I have that start, I do go and do something afterwards. I usually have a bit of time out because it's quite focused. Even if you're doing morning pages, it's a real focused sort of time. So I usually take myself away, but when I come back, I'm in that zone of ready to go. I'm not all over the place. I'm not scattered. When I don't do it, I have that feeling of being a little bit scattered, and it takes me probably an hour or more to settle into my day, whereas I think we've already done that by the time we have breakfast. That's a bonus.
Yeah, I relate to that, and I think it's that accountability to each other, but accountability to the practice too, which is great.
Yes.
So, yeah. Some people have asked us about how hard it is to get up early and write, and I think we've found that it's not so hard the more you do it. So what would you say motivates you or makes it easy to get up?
Well, we were talking recently at your launch about morning and evening, and I think I wasn't perhaps always a morning person, because I know when my kids were little, they used to go to bed quite early, and I used to have this sort of evening where I would do creative things or whatever I was doing. But I think over the years, I'd become a bit of a morning person. So the actual getting up naturally isn't that difficult. But in 2016, I got acquainted with Ayurveda, and they have a real teaching about greeting the day and various routines that you do. So I was already in that frame of mind. So getting up wasn't such a problem. But I do think that once you start to wake up early and you do it consistently, you do find yourself going to bed earlier. I find when I get out of the habit of it, I think over January when we had a break, I found myself going to bed at like 11:30 midnight and sleeping in. But when you actually get in that habit, you can't last long past 9:30, 10. And then I just have everything set up, ready to go. I'm not a crazy organised person, but I usually spend a few minutes getting my teapot ready, getting my drink bottle ready, making sure I've got room to balance a computer somewhere. I have my the Ayurvedic routines that I might do already in the one spot. So I find that makes it easier, just to not be scrambling for things. So I never have that sense that I'm belting down to turn on the computer in the nick of time. I always feel like it's a smooth transition.
What I'm hearing from you is what I've learned too, and also working with clients, is that's what you do the night before really helps with the morning. The morning routine starts with the evening routine.
Yes.
And it was funny, we only talked about it at the virtual launch, but I do the same thing. I always make sure my clothes are there, make sure the kettle's filled up, the cup's there, it's got the tea bag in, and I just know there's a set number of things. And in a way, that's actually lovely. It's nice because you don't get distracted. You're just there to do that. And I said to you, I think this morning when we were talking, that if I don't have the accountability of you being there, I might get up earlier, but I tend to faff around. And I don't. I think it helps to focus.
Yes, it does. And I think when I don't have somebody else there, I don't do the 25-minute bursts in the morning. I do sometimes do that during the day by myself, but in the morning I don't tend to do it. And I think that does sort of lead you. The 25 minutes is a really good container for pouring things out. So, yeah, I'm a bit the same. If I'm by myself, I tend to go through all those steps, but I don't settle as easily, I think, because part of the routine isn't quite there.
For sure. So tell us some more about your book and where you're up to in the writing process.
Well, as of today, I had the last 800 words or so, which were the conclusion. And I don't know if you felt like this, but I felt a bit teary today, just finishing off that last 800 words, because this piece of writing, this project, has been such a companion through lockdown, and we haven't always seen eye to eye, and it's sometimes been a bit of a love-hate relationship, but we've had each other's back the whole 2 years or close to 2 years. So it felt great to start piecing that bit of writing together, but I realised that I'd left it for a while, and I think it was because I just didn't want to sign off on that container that has really held, you know, my work and my life together, because I haven't been able to work in schools consistently. So I've just finished that, and the rest of the book has just undergone the first full structural edit, where you move everything around and check your arguments and all those sorts of things. So I know you and I always say this, that you finish one part and you go, oh, that's that. I finished my book, and then you find that you haven't quite finished your book. So I feel like I've been saying, oh, I've finished for a long time. But I think the gritty writing part of it is finished, or close to finished. And the book is about the importance of developing a daily writing practice in your classroom. It has prompts and ideas and activities, whereas we tend to work on our own, generate our own writing projects. It's not dissimilar in a way to what we do. I think when I first started it, I saw it very much as being the way to balance standardized testing. And in the rewriting, because I've actually restructured the whole book from the original manuscript, I had to really try and find a way to make it doable for teachers. So it's really about how you could do a daily writing practice in the first 15 minutes of the day, or some time in the day. So how you could actually make sure that your kids had that opportunity to interact with writing away from obvious assessment, and how they could learn to develop their own processes. Because often in a classroom, you're providing one way of doing things, whereas this is very much about kids learning to appreciate their own creative processes and have the sorts of conversations that we're having in the morning that form writing identity, that get them to think about how they interact with writing. So I guess my goal is to have a group of people that don't see writing as something that happens in a classroom, that they see, like we've discussed, writing as a thread that will run through their lives in all different ways. That would be my greatest wish for that book.
What a brilliant goal to have for your book, and to bring all your body of work as a teacher and a writer to share that love.
I have a love affair with capturing ideas. I like to think, and so I think writing is a way of capturing ideas and playing with words. And I do really love that. I think writing makes life better, much better. And I think we could solve a lot of problems if people not necessarily wrote at 5:30 in the morning, but had time to think on paper every day.
I totally agree. It's made all the difference in my life, and something I've shared about in my book too, of my 15 wholehearted self-leadership skills for women, writing regularly is right up there, whether it's for clarity or sorting things out. It doesn't have to be a book.
It's a tremendous thinking tool. I think some people do leave writing at school and they finish and they think that that's that. But you can write for an audience of one. You don't have to see yourself as writing for other people. You can be a writer that just writes and thinks on paper for yourself. And I think if we could get our politicians in the habit of daily writing practice, I think we'd see some real changes in Australia.
I think we might too. Makes a huge difference. So we've shared the ups and downs through the long haul writing process has been working on books, and we both experienced challenges in the editing phases that we've talked about. My journey of writing was that I found the editing so much harder than I ever thought it would be. How about you? How did you find that?
I had a slightly different experience, I think, because the book was picked up by a traditional publisher and the publishing house was taken over by another company. So when it was taken over, I was then given the feedback that the book as it stood needed to be restructured. So I basically had this manuscript that I had to come up with a different plan and then find bits of the book that fitted into all of those sort of chapters. So it was a real puzzle for me. And I think that's where Dawn Writers made such a difference in those early days, because it really took a lot of courage to get in and try and piece this together. So the editing, the structural edit and checking that everything's matched and that I put the puzzle back together in the right way has been, I love words, but it's been a slog.
Yeah.
Absolute slog.
I've used the word slog because it is. And then we had a discussion, some in the morning and some in the virtual launch. Other words came up like tenacity and resilience. But yes, when you're going through it, it definitely feels like a slog.
And I think culturally we expect things to move. We live in a fast world. We expect things to move quickly. And everywhere around you, you do have information, ideas like write your book in 30 days. And there's this expectation that writing can be done quickly if you're productive and if you put time. And where I found that I did all of those things and it was slow. And so you have to learn to be happy with progress in whatever way it takes. And I don't think I understood that, unfortunately, till the very end. I think in one of the conversations that we had in the morning, we talked about slow writing, and that wasn't that many weeks ago. And I think the penny dropped that my expectation of what I could do and what actually played out were quite different. So instead of being happy with where I was in the process and being in the moment, I was always berating myself for not being faster and not being more productive or not being this or not being that. And I think it might be easier the next time because I've had that experience of my expectations and the reality being quite different. And that's a real mindset. Any long haul project, I think you have to really put your mind to it. Don't you?
Absolutely. And it's patience, getting frustrated with yourself because it's not finished or it's not this or it's not that can pop up quite a lot. My particular version of that is that I made it quite tricky for myself because I wrote this very huge draft. And then, fortunately, working with Penelope Love, who received it as a friend and an editor, helped me with the developmental editing to realise there was 2 books in there, but then we had to separate them out. And then it was working on the 2 at one time, so I certainly didn't make it easy for myself in that sense.
So sort of similar in that your manuscript was a bit of a puzzle. That first manuscript was a puzzle to put together.
Absolutely. When you said puzzle, I went, yeah, that's exactly what I experienced, because what we actually did was went through and colour-coded the bits that went, we had the whole manuscript. One, blue was the main one, and I think a pinky colour was the second colour. And then there was another colour for things that perhaps didn't quite go in either. It really was a puzzle.
I used to worry about this last year, and I don't think too much about it now, but I used to think parts of this are going to get missed and they're going to sort of fall off and I'm going to want them back. I don't worry about that so much because I feel like any parts that are missed, I've got all the manuscripts, so they'll be repurposed in some way. But it seemed important to me last year that I couldn't lose any of it.
I felt that too. I have a document. I just put all the things that didn't go anywhere else. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing we've talked about on the way through was maybe doing a session of how not to write because of all the things that we've learned on the way through the journey. It might be nice to share with people a few things we have learned about what not to do.
Ooh, what not to do. One of the things that is significant to my experience, and perhaps it would be across genres as well, is I think writing a book in the educational space has mostly a particular structure, and I didn't understand that. I wasn't quite aware of that. And I think perhaps if I'd have taken a step back early days and looked at what that structure might be, I perhaps wouldn't have chosen the way that I chose to approach it. However, the flip side of that is that I got to say it exactly how I would have said it, and it has been possible to make it into a different shape. So I think rather than spend too much time worrying about it, perhaps people should jump in and know that if it's not quite the right outline or it's not quite the right structure, it is possible to change. That's the upside of it. But I feel like if I had perhaps done that, I could have saved myself a lot of time, definitely. And I also used an editor because I intended to self-publish. I also used an editor. And whilst the editor, freelance editor, her work was fine, but I think I also needed someone who had worked in that space and who was in educational publishing. So I think that would have also probably given me a few more clues early on that the structure might not have actually worked. So I think being a bit specific to your genre, perhaps looking at what other books in that space might look like and the structure they use, and looking at who edits in that space, sort of narrows down, builds your field of expertise. So I didn't do that. I really sort of threw it up and did it my own way, which now I can say that it all worked out for the best. But I think I may have saved myself some time and heartache, perhaps.
And as you're talking, that really resonated with my own experience, that idea of writing that very long draft and then realising that there were two books. I had always thought about a workbook, for example, but not probably something that was a distinct separate book that had quite a lot of content in it too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, similar learnings. And maybe it's just part of the writing process.
Yes.
You create a bigger thing and you do your own way of working, and then you work out what the piece wants to look like.
You could spend a lot of time and energy researching and fitting into a structure, and you may have to change it anyway. So I think you have to start, don't you? You just have to make a start and trust that the material, if you have a strong enough connection and a strong enough will to birth it into the world, that piece of work will find its shape. I think you just have to trust that. Did you think too much about that, what you might have to do to shape it when you were writing it?
Not in the way that it happened, but I did have a strong sense of what it looked like. And like I've shared on social media, the mind map, and I had a structure pretty early on about what I wanted it to look like. And I had that idea of being layered and spiraled, which is in there. But I think it had to evolve itself, like you say.
Yes.
It had to incubate and it had to grow, and I had to have life experiences to bring to it. And we've both read the lovely Anne Jance's The Writer's Process, where she talks about it like bread and the dough, the idea of the dough rising, where sometimes things have to almost take on a life of their own before we then know what to do with them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what else I know we've had so many conversations about this, and I think perhaps because I've just finished that last little bit of writing, I'm in that optimistic space where I feel like I did everything. Everything happened as it should. Not necessarily that I did everything right, but everything happened to plan in some shape or form. What other things have we talked about that we would do differently?
I think probably the structure is the one that we've both experienced, and it sounds like that's something that you learn from experience. The next book you write will be different to the first time around or second time around. Probably some of the things we've talked about, the idea of that mindset around the long haul creative mindset, and just being a bit more patient. And then the other thing too, I think, is just realising the value of writing community and co-writing. I mean, it took me a long time. On my journey, it's been very much about realising that writing is much more collaborative than I thought it was.
Yes, and I think that's true. I did work with a mentor originally to sort of start things off, and I really liked having that camaraderie with somebody else. Yes, then it did feel for a long, long time like I was just left to my own devices. And it's lonely to sort of hold faith to something that you're not really quite sure what the outcome will be. So, yeah, I think Dawn Writers always feels like an act of bravery. Community does have that sense of bravery, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's realising too, whilst we often write alone, even if we're writing together, you write alone, it's that idea of realising that it's the communities or the connections. We met through Mastermind, through the Gentle Business Mastermind, which supported me as a community, and I know supported you. So that idea of at least having somewhere where you can just say, well, this is what I'm up to, this is what I'm doing.
And we're invested in each other's work. I think that's what you find, that you become really interested in what you're doing, and I've got to see the process unfold for you, which has been highly motivating. So, yeah, the value of community, and early on, the value of having that community is really important.
Wish I'd had it a bit early on in the process too. It's been a big learning for me about co-writing and writing community and how important it is. So we're both writing teachers by background. Interestingly, I also started as an infants primary teacher and then went into adult, and then I worked in the adult literacy area. You took another path, but I'm interested as a fellow writing teacher how being a writing teacher helps you with your own writing.
I haven't had after school classes now since the beginning of 2020, but prior to that, I would run pop-up after school classes based at schools, but I also had my own group of students that followed through over years, many years, and they were my writing group really, because I would write with them. Anything that I learnt or was interested in, I took to that group. I'm forever grateful to those parents, because although I would, at the beginning of the term, plot out a program, but the parents were incredibly trusting of what we would achieve during that time and how it would play out. So I had a lot of freedom. Like one time I was reading Natalie Goldberg about walking meditation. So I decided that we would do walking meditation before we started writing. So all the things that I learned I could bring and share in community. And although these writers were aged 8 to 12 and 13, they were equally as skilled as me. So I did have that sense of a meeting with another group of writers every week. But also when you're teaching, it's never the same. So you're drawing on what the kids give you and you're learning things as you go. Once we were sharing bits of writing and talking, we ended up just talking about the power of verbs and how a verb really transported the meaning of the sentence, and it had to be quite specific. And it led me on this personal journey about verbs. So I felt like anything I learnt, I brought to my classes, and anything that came up at those classes became my points of curiosity. So it's this wonderful circle of giving and taking. I did a podcast a while ago, and Ellen, who you know, introduced me as a teacher at heart. And I thought that's very true. I think teaching and writing have always been so important to me. And it's the teaching I learn. I never feel with teaching that it's just something that I'm giving. I feel even when I step into a classroom to do a workshop, I always come out knowing that I've discovered something new, or I've seen something new, or something has happened that keeps me company on the way home. Some student had this little piece of writing about the book of everything, and I mulled over this book of everything all the way home. So the characters that I hear and the storylines that I get to hear just sort of play in my head on the way home.
Oh, sounds like a wonderful dance of ideas and inspiration and imagination.
Actually, that's a beautiful image, because that's how it really does feel like a nice sort of flow between those things, and this lovely sort of movement and choreography, some of which is planned and some of which is just moving to the music.
Yeah, beautiful. So there's 2 questions that I'm asking every guest on the Create Your Story podcast. It's a big question, but just interested in what comes up for people. So firstly, how have you created your story over your lifetime?
I think that the beginnings of the story that I'm in now, the phase of life that I'm in now, I think part of the thread of that, and perhaps part of the writing, how the writing fits into this too, is that I'm one of 6 kids, so 4 older sisters and a younger brother. And I think when you come in at number 5, some of the key archetypal roles in the family are already taken. So we already had the smart one, the super generous, the athletic, the organised. So I never felt under pressure to do this, but I do think you try and find ways to be different and to define yourself, and looking for your voice or finding your voice and being heard in that group is really important. And I think part of what I do now with writing and what I do with teachers is about finding your voice. So I feel like find your voice has been the common thread in that storyline. That's the plot, really. And it's finding your voice through all these different mediums and elements and relationships and experiences. And I think morning pages, and I know that tarot is something, I had oracle cards, but I think tarot is something that I've really seen and read from your book, but seen you do. And it's now becoming something that really inspires my intuition. So it's not just finding your voice and speaking out, but it's feeding and nurturing that inner voice that voice of intuition.
Mm.
So those tools, writing, tarot, and incubating ideas for me, gardening, all of those things are about creating something and speaking through the things that you create or the stories or whatever.
I love that thread of finding your voice and all that you do, and teaching's a way of sharing what's important and making a difference too. So thank you. It's beautiful. And you've touched on some of these. So in Wholehearted, I talk about wholehearted self-leadership tips, and we share some passions in those areas, but there are any particular top wholehearted self-leadership tips and practices, especially for women, that you'd mention just in closing?
Well, I know we've spoken about writing. Perhaps that's probably that, or some sort of daily reflection time. Perhaps for some people that's not necessarily writing. Maybe that's painting, maybe that's reading. But I do think that having some time out, and it doesn't have to be long. Sometimes when we think of self-care or self-leadership, we imagine we need big chunks of time. And I don't think you do need big chunks of time. I think you need to just carve out a little bit of space to hear your voice in whatever way that plays out for you, whether that's in the garden or in the shower, wherever, just tuning into something other than the world around you is really important to me. Perhaps it is about finding your voice, using your voice, but nurturing your voice as well. And creativity, I think, is the heart and soul of us. And I think everybody is creative. I think some people practice creativity in different ways, and their skills may be more defined in certain areas, but we're all creative. That is what marks us different from animals and from various other species. So I think honouring that in some way is one of the best ways that you can make your mark on the world, which is self-leadership. So whatever that is, however you decide to practice creativity, and in whatever shape or form, I think those two things, taking some time to reflect and perhaps an internal response and an external response, making something, thinking about something, connecting ideas, all of those things, an internal and an external response is a nice connection, just a way of responding, a nice response, I think, to your day.
Yeah, so it's like a way of internalising, but also bringing in like it's a balance thing. We know too much internal work, not be externalising can be a problem, but getting out and not taking the time to settle and integrate can be a problem too. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's about that balance of the two that makes a big difference.
Yes. And in whatever way it works for you. I think we're spending so much time and we have so much great information at our fingertips about how people all live. And sometimes it looks like other people, what they're doing works so well and we have to try it. But I'll never forget when I first started yoga, I had this great teacher, Rita, and we were all mid-pose, and I'm not particularly flexible when it comes to yoga. So holding a pose for me, mid-pose isn't a fabulous way to stop. But we were all mid-pose and she stopped us and said, just out of the blue, be your own guru. Stop paying so much attention to other voices and listen to your own voice. So I always have somewhere on my desk, be your own guru, because part of that internal is looking at what you already have in there.
Yeah, and what the truth is for you, not because we're all so different.
Yeah.
So, yeah, beautiful. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So Where can people find out more about you and your book and work online?
Well, I have a website. So the website is Write Away With Me. And I'm on Instagram also at Write Away With Me, which is a blend of my own writing life and my work. I do run programs, and hopefully we'll run programs again in schools once we're up and running. But I do also run programs for kids online. So if you come to the website, you can have a look and see what's around. I've had a term off, but I'll be heading back into doing some online classes again.
Great, that's fantastic. And you and I have also been hatching up some plans for something very exciting together to offer next year. So shall we chat a little bit about that?
Yes.
Beth and I are joining forces to offer, I think, the experiences of a lot of the things we've talked about today. Yeah. That community, support, skills, teaching, coaching, skills we bring together, but also I know you and I are both big believers in creating a space or creating a container and facilitating. So that's something with a focus on writing.
We had our first planning session yesterday. I was all buzzy by the end of the day, so it's nothing better than having that feeling. But we've talked a lot together, and because I've had this experience, I'm really keen to explore writing identity and how we view our relationship with writing and how we can build that relationship with writing. Because I know that the experience of working on a book has changed that dynamic for me completely. I think writing has always been there, but now writing is very much part of how I see myself. And that wasn't always the case. If someone asked me what I did, I probably never said that I was a writer. I probably chose teacher or various other labels. So I'm really keen to explore how we step into that relationship with writing and how we develop that relationship with writing, because I think that makes all the difference to how you then approach writing projects.
Absolutely. And I think, that's something we've both learned as people always passionate about writing, being writing teachers, working with others, but also going through writing projects and writing longer haul projects like books. Yeah. So the things we'll be focusing on are all about identity. And in that, to me, is a bit around mindset.
Yeah.
How we see ourselves, skills, because there's obviously skills involved in writing. But I think both of us are very strong on writing process too, and that'll be a key part of what we'll explore.
Yeah, and also the conversations. That's where the real jewels are, don't you think? The ability to share your experience with someone and have them say, oh, I see you and I hear you. I know where you're coming from. And I think that has been part of our journey together, because we've been able to do that for each other. And we have the proof of how that works or how that has worked for us. So, yeah, I'd love to be able to offer the goodness of that to other people who want to, be involved or take on a writing project of some sort.
Absolutely. And as we said earlier, I think I particularly said, but I think you've also mentioned that idea that I wish I'd had writing community earlier in my journey. And I think that's what we can offer too, is that idea of community, how to create community, being a community together, and the support. We'll put a link where people can express interest if they'd like to know more in the show notes. So stay tuned.
Yeah, watch space. It's being currently planned as we speak.
Yeah, but I think it'll be a really exciting space and program for next year for us to share. So thanks again, Beth. It's been a real joy to talk today.
My pleasure. I've loved it. And I feel so proud. To see your book in the world is like seeing the dream of our mornings in a really tangible way, isn't it?
Oh, thank you. That's really beautiful to hear. And I can't wait to see yours in the world too. That's going to be a very exciting day too.
Yeah, I think there's nothing like having other writers invested in your work, because it feels incredible to have people who are not just happy for it to be out in the world, which of course everyone is, but to really have a sense of watching it grow up almost.
Yeah, it's because it's a real psychological journey, that whole, practical and psychological journey. So for someone to go on that road with you, on that trip, it's very special. So thank you for being that for me.
And thank you. I just marvel at the fact that one night in the shower I had this idea and it ended up being so fruitful for both of us.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you had that thought in the shower.
Same.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Beth.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening today, and I hope you found it inspiring and supportive. You can find the episode show notes, get your free copy of Chapter 1 of Wholehearted, and find out more about my books, coaching, and other offerings at quietwriting.com. Connect with me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I am at Writing Quietly. Please leave a review on your favourite podcast app too to help others find the show and create their story. And warmest wishes for you as you create your story in the world.